This is an adapted version of the story titled Just a Dream, written by Chris Van Allsburg. One day, a boy named Walter was walking home from school, and as usual, he stopped by the local bakery to buy his favorite jelly-filled donut. And as he continued home eating his donut, he took the pastry's wrapper and he crumpled it up into a nice ball, and he tossed it at the fire hydrant as he walked along home. As he got home, he noticed his neighbor Rose watering a tree in the front yard. And she said, "Hi, Walter! How are you doing today? Look at my birthday present!" Walter's birthday was in just a few days, and he thought to himself, "Boy, I don't want a dumb plant for my birthday." And he continued on inside. His mother asked him to take out the garbage. So as usual, Walter grabbed the bag of garbage and he walked out to the garage where there were 3 cans labeled compost, the other recycling, and the third was labeled trash. And as usual, Walter took his bag and he threw it into one can by the garage, anxious to get inside to watch his favorite television show about a boy who lived in the future, who owned his very own tiny airplane, which he parked on the roof of his house. And Walter, too, wanted to live in the future. And that night, he imagined what it would be like to own his very own tiny airplane and have a robot that would take out the trash for him. And maybe even a robot that at a push of a button could make 1,000 jelly-filled donuts. Walter fell asleep. His wish came true. His bed traveled to the future. And he woke up to the sound of a bulldozer coming at him. Beep, beep, beep. And Walter yelled out, "Stop!" And the man slowed his engine and looked over the side of his steering wheel and said to Walter, "Oh, I'm sorry, son. I didn't see you here. I didn't realize there was anybody around." Walter asked the man, "Does anybody live here?" "Not anymore. We used to." Just as the man said that, Walter looked over to the edge of his bed and he noticed a street sign that said, "How's that street?" Now it was a rolling fields of garbage and this land filled with seagulls and the stench. And the man said, "Well, back to work. Have a good day." Walter pulled the covers up over his head and drifted off back to sleep. But this time he woke up and he was in the tree branches and he could feel the wind swaying his bed in the air, and he could hear voices. So he looked out over his bed, and sure enough, he was high up in the treetops. And looking down, he saw 2 men working. They were carrying this large saw as they walked over to the tree that Walter's bed was in. "You aren't going to cut down this tree, are you?" Walter yelled down below. But they didn't respond. And he could just read the words on their t-shirts that said, "Quality Toothpick Company." Surely Walter thought that this tree would be used for something more important than toothpicks. This had to just be a dream. Walter pulled the covers up over his head and fell asleep until he couldn't breathe, and he was coughing and his throat was burning and his eyes were itching, and he opened them, and as he opened his eyes he could see dozens of smokestacks, and his bed was resting on the edge of one as a workman was climbing the smokestack next to him. Walter asked, "Excuse me, sir, but what is this place?" And the man replied, "Well, this is a quality medicine factory." "What kind of medicine do they make here?" "Well, great medicine for burning throats and itchy eyes. Can I get you some?" "Oh, thanks," Walter said. He was just trying to breathe. He closed his eyes so they would stop burning, and eventually he drifted off to sleep. This time, he woke up. He was shivering cold and it was freezing. He could feel snowflakes on him and he could hear the sound of the crunching snow next to him. He opened his eyes and he saw some hikers snowshoeing up a mountain. "Where are you going?" Walter asked. They didn't respond. So he looked out over the back of his bed and he saw this yellow flashing sign that read Hotel Everest. So Walter asked the hikers, "Is that hotel really on the top of Mount Everest?" But the hikers just continued on. And Walter was trying to get warm and he pulled the blankets up and eventually fell back to sleep. But then he could feel his bed swaying back and forth and his hand felt wet and cold and he could hear cheering and laughter. Walter opened his eyes. His bed was floating in the open sea, going towards two men in a boat. They had just caught a fish, and they were celebrating. Walter said, "What's all the celebrating for?" "We just caught a fish. It's our second one this week." Walter asked, "Well, aren't you going to throw it back?" But the men were too busy celebrating their catch of the day. They didn't hear Walter's question. Walter lay there in his bed in the open sea, in the warm sun, just thinking, this certainly can't be the future. This is just a dream. And he fell asleep, waking to the smell of exhaust fumes and horns honking. And he opened his eyes. His bed was stuck in traffic. There were 5 lanes of traffic moving an inch or two an hour. People were agitated, irritable, and everyone had a cell phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. And Walter just wanted to go to sleep. He was so tired, but he couldn't with all the noise and the smell of exhaust. But after hours and hours, cars ran out of gas. And people fell asleep too. And so did Walter. But then he woke up smelling a horse. Something was sniffing him. He opened his eyes and there was this giant Clydesdale standing right next to his bed. He could hear a lady's voice. He couldn't quite see her. So yellow and all the smog, and he was trying to brush it out of its way. He asked, "Where am I?" "Boy, you're in the Great Grand Canyon," replied the cowgirl. "I can't see anything with all this smog." "Well, people haven't been able to in decades. All the air pollution." "Here, I have a postcard right here. Show you how beautiful the Grand Canyon looked back in the day." Walter didn't want to look. He just closed his eyes and wanted to go back to sleep. And eventually he did. And then he woke up. And his bed was flying through the sky. And he could hear ducks, and as he listened closer, he could hear them talking. And they were looking for some water or a pond down below. They had been flying for days, and when Walter opened his eyes, the duck asked, "Do you mind if I take a rest here on the edge of your bed?" Walter didn't know what to say. He just nodded yes. He asked the ducks if they were okay. They said no, they weren't. Walter assured the duck that everything would be all right, knowing inside it might not be. And eventually, Walter did fall back to sleep. And he woke up, safe in his room. He was feeling terrible. Boy, the future certainly wasn't what he had imagined. Tiny airplanes and robots, boy, they didn't really matter anymore. Walter looked out his window and the sun was just rising. He could hear the morning birds chirping. Still in his pajamas, he ran outside and he ran down to that fire hydrant and he picked up that pastry bag and he took it home, he pulled out the garbage and he sorted it off. Later that day, it was his birthday. All his friends came over, they were celebrating. Got the usual gifts, Legos, a yo-yo. His favorite gift of all was a tree he had picked out with his dad. And outside, he went and showed all his friends. And that night, he fell asleep. And this time he woke up, and the shade of two very charming trees. He saw a man. He said, "What is this place? This looks like a pass." Clothes drying on the line and a pushless mower. And the man said, "Yeah, you found a great place to rest. Aren't those trees wonderful? My great-grandmother planted them many years ago."